The Nomiki Show.
Lindsey Boylan is not only a community leader, she is most recently the former candidate for Manhattan Borough President of New York City, and she is an urban planner. She previously served as Deputy Secretary for Economic Development and Housing for the state of New York under Governor Cuomo, who she's not in doesn't have a great relationship with now. We'll get to that in a bit. But from my perspective, we love her because Lindsey secured millions of dollars for underfunded public housing, led the state's efforts to provide assistance for the people of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and she pushed to enact the $15 minimum wage and paid family leave policy for New Yorkers in New York State. She previously served on community boards 5 and 7 in Manhattan as well. There she is, live from a car in an undisclosed location.
There you go.
You're looking like you're well rested. I mean, it's only a little over a week and a half since Election Day, and obviously the election will never end. But you look well rested, so that's always a good sign.
Good, it's good, yeah.
All right, so I'm just really excited to have you on because you've obviously been in the city, and I know that this is. Post-election is always a really hard time because you're still kind of working through all that stuff, which I personally understand. But so before we even get to what's going on with the Board of Elections, I just want to say thank you for stepping up courageously, running, and challenging an establishment that has, on all ends, has been, as we're living through right now, has taken the worst from Tammany Hall and kept it as a legacy in New York, I think is probably the safest way to say it.
It's terrible for all of us, right? It's really bad.
Yeah. Largest city in the country. Supposedly this progressive city, when everybody thought the IDC was unheard of, then let's zoom in on the Board of Elections. So, I understand that obviously you've just run, but whatever you're able to say, feel free to say it. I don't think people are holding back much right now based on this debacle. But for our audience, let me just run through some stuff because I think this is important. The Board of Elections, of course, is an appointed board, unlike many other states. And as we've discussed on the show before, there's a lot of nepotism. There are a lot of family members and friends and distant relatives of elected officials and former elected officials. Were you surprised by just how bad they handled ranked choice voting?
What is it that everyone's saying? I'd like to see the Democratic Party at my funeral so they can let me down one last time, into my grave or whatever it is. No, I'm not surprised. I have maybe the unique position of having observed as a candidate this round a year ago before our CV, and just the unusual nature of counting absentee ballots was such a production operationally. Even if you had people who were the best at what they did, who were well resourced and well prepared, that would have been a nightmare. And I think for me, more than anything else, it says how uninterested our Democratic leaders are in people actually voting. And having their voices be heard. Because at the end of the day, the best outcome for the Democratic machine in New York is if their people come out and no one else. They're not really interested in making it easy. And they're not really interested in making the system less opaque. I think there are we lost people who work at the Board of Elections during the pandemic. The everyday person taking my petitions, working real hard under really tough conditions. The people who are to blame are the leaders, both at the Board of Elections and our elected leaders, including people like Jay Jacobs, people like the mayor in this case, people like the governor.
Is the chair of the Democratic Party in this
these leaders are the ones who are supposed to anticipate major changes. And could we have had a more significant change than ranked choice voting? And I think in some respects, it doesn't benefit the machine and the Democratic Party to have these things go well. I mean, kind of like the MTA, the governor gets to blame someone else, even though behind the scenes he controls it. And I think this is very much the same. So maybe I'm a little bit more relaxed now because I know I'm not one of the top two, gentlemen who who've been in this game for a long time and who are leading. So I'm just, wanting this to work out and not have people cross messaging that this is somehow voter suppression like Eric Adams. But it's a mess, and anything that disenfranchises or not disenfranchises, but disenchants New Yorkers on our voting process and gives it the sense of integrity is really bad. So it sucks, really bad.
It's interesting because there is this thing that's happening in this city and nationwide. I think post-Trump, probably earlier, probably from Occupy on, but let's just say for like a less progressive, more normie Democratic voter, if I can just say it that way. I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that we need reform in this state and in this city. They were surprised when they saw the turnout rates and just people become more active, but simultaneously there's this establishment that's been relying on kind of keeping a fairly democratic and honestly a fairly progressive state. I think if you were to poll most Democrats in the state about where they stand on key issues,
yes.
They would say, yeah, I'm for Medicare for all. Yeah, I'm for, funding the MTA. Yeah, I am for fully funding public schools. Yeah, I'm for, public spaces for people, all about funding public housing. I mean, I think this, for the most part, I'm anti-development. I don't want oligarchs buying up our city. I think a lot of New Yorkers, most who are Democrats, would be in favor of these things. But the establishment in New York which is of course in the bed of real estate and the police unions up until maybe like a minute ago for some of them, they've relied on keeping everybody blind to all this. And so post-Trump in particular, people are like, yeah, voting reform sounds great. So they dismantled the IDC and they got all these voting reforms and the establishment. It's like the two things are pushing up against each other.
I mean, I always laugh when all these, what you call it, normie Democrats and everyone carries around copies of The Power Broker, like the only person who's controlled a state and influenced people's lives is Robert Moses. We've got a few men like that right now. And I think the governor is the most significant. What he's doing at the World Trade Center site with luxury development, all of the machinations around how we're going to spend federal aid. Just as an aside, this people shouldn't have to live their lives in the election process in order for their government to work for them. But I think people like Andrew Cuomo and even Mayor de Blasio benefit from people not engaging as much. And, you go door knocking as a candidate and you realize some buildings had polling sites in them purely so that they could reelect their leaders, like Shelley Silver, for instance, downtown. And all of the way things are set up is not democratic. And I just think it's really embarrassing that, we listen to women or people like Stacey Abrams and say, yes, what's happening there is so wrong. And then we have our own state, which will redraw the election lines post-census, and it will absolutely be done to preserve the establishment and who sits in those offices now. And I think we're seeing it in real time. In some ways, I think it's a false narrative to blame the everyday worker at the Board of Elections. I mean, these people are working hard. They've lost their colleagues, like so many New Yorkers. And like so many examples, leaders, mostly old white men on high, do something to make a system fail and then find a way to blame the average worker, which I think happens even with some of our failed union leaders. Like, I don't want to go into it, but look who was at the governor's $1 million fundraising dinner last week. It was party leadership, people like Keith Wright, who's supposed to be the Democratic Party leader for Manhattan, people who are supposed to be serving their workers and their community, but instead they're sucking on the teat of power, frankly.
Governor Cuomo had a fundraiser last week where he raised $1 million, at least, I think, off of $10,000 tickets because, and by the way, that's not the cap. And he could still sell 100 plus tickets because he still controls the budget, which is already done with. So it's very interesting that they're investing them now. it's funny. You mentioned the thing about Shelley Silver. So just for our audience, not even New Yorkers who are newer to
I
the
know.
movement.
Sometimes I go to, thank you.
It's okay. No, listen, I'm a geek. I used to live in that building where that polling site was on Grand Street. So you mentioned it and I was like, oh my God. It was very convenient for me to go vote. I'll just say that. But
yes.
Yeah. I was a neighbor of, so Shelley Silver was the former Speaker of the Assembly not too long ago, but he'd been in office for, I don't know, his whole life. But he was one of the remaining, if not the last remnant of Tammany Hall. Very young. I mean, I think his mentor was from Tammany Hall. And he ran the assembly and finally, through a slew of corruption scandals, including the speaker and the leader of the Senate, and many others, was actually sentenced to jail and has kind of been going back and forth in his old age. But a Democrat. And I think this is the important part is it's not that we don't, not all Democrats obviously are corrupt. And it's not that the state is full of Democrats that are corrupt. There's just this legacy of the worst habits of Tammany Hall, of the power in a state where we should fundamentally be far more progressive. But because we have, Wall Street and real estate, two major interests in the city, there's this tendency. And I think what's very strange about right now, and I'm curious where you see this going, is I feel yes, there's a progressive shift, but simultaneously there's an effort to, oh my God, it's coming. We're going to have another progressive era, which came out of New York. How do we facilitate the same power structures within the progressive movement to keep them at bay? Because, do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, I totally do.
Going that way.
I totally do. And I think it's enormously frustrating. And, I think probably the majority of the people in my borough president's race call themselves progressive, but I would say that the way that they've been able to move through the power structure is anything but what, in my view, progressive ideals are about. If you have to get in line. I mean, this is great to me. The fall of Scott Stringer, in some respect, that's a machine in Manhattan. The Jerry Nadler, Scott Stringer machine has controlled and adjudicated who gets to be in and out. Corey Johnson a little bit too. Who gets to?
Can you explain that a little bit more? What that, who they are and what that means?
You can't even go to a political club. You will be booed out of the room if you don't get in line with Jerry Nadler, which of course I have a penchant for not getting in line with old white men in power. But Scott Stringer worked for Jerry Nadler. And interestingly enough, if you look at most of the people that machine has promoted, it's mostly older white men, with the exception, I think, of women like Linda Rosenthal, who I believe dated Scott Stringer for a number of years. And this is not to debase any of the important work that people do, but if you are in the political sphere in Manhattan, for example, you know that the only way that you can safely move forward is by getting in line with those people. You won't even be welcome to political clubs that support them. You won't be offered interviews for important unions that are behind them. And this creates a system that makes it very hard to go your own way if you want to be successful. I'm quite certain that if I had decided to, not open my mouth, not be the person that I am, I would have had a much easier road to getting to, office. But if you have to trade everything that you're trying to do in order to get somewhere, you're not getting anywhere good. And I think that is, we view these fights as kind of procedural and inside baseball. My husband, who does not like politics, I think a lot of New Yorkers don't, say, oh, that's in the weeds. But the reality is, if we want to go back to the Robert Moses example, he controlled, a dozen or so agencies, and people didn't want to have to live their lives thinking about how things were controlled by a small number of hands and how that was influenced by Albany, which is not in New York City, but the power structure is in Albany. And it's a way to obfuscate how power is adjudicated, who gets access to it, and how it is bought. And particularly right now in the city of New York, that is the real big concern, I think, is significant real estate developers and development. They control the process for everything. And I think even a lot of the reason why the building trades are standing by the governor is because they want their workers to get access to new infrastructure work and new construction. You can't really blame them, but it means that people have to participate in a corrupt system, and that has to end. And I think I have been heartened by, organizations that choose to buck that trend. I do hold hope, particularly for things like ranked choice voting and for particularly women of color who are speaking out and who are challenging that system. It's still a marathon, and you're still sucking wind the whole way. You know what I'm talking about. I don't need to tell you.
Oh, I know.
Real
Real estate came after me.
Yeah.
No doubt. They were like, oh, we don't know who went. Oh, I do. Maybe the publications that attacked me were all funded by real estate developers. Shocker.
Scott Reckler. Let's look at that example. He's been put on a bunch of boards, a bunch of important metro region decision-making boards that control billions of dollars in investment. He is a very significant real estate developer. And he's also the chair of the 92nd Street Y. So in every possible way, this is a person who is influencing the decisions that are made by our city. And he's not an elected. He is not accountable to our people. And I don't really blame him, because he's doing things for his own interest and his perception of what he thinks is best. But we didn't elect him. We didn't choose him.
Yeah.
But because the governor wants to continue to elevate him. Yeah, go ahead.
No. I mean, I think you're right, because the MTA board, for instance, the MTA, of course, is our subway, our busing system, is our public transit system in New York City, and it is extraordinarily underfunded. And if you have spent 2 minutes in New York, you know very well the trains don't run on time; they barely run. The signals are outdated. A million different things. The most famous, subway renovator had quit in frustration, which doesn't leave us a lot of hope about fixing it.
And he was amazing. He was one of the great public servants that we had. Train daddy.
Yeah. Exactly. No, but that's a great, I mean, it's, if he can't fix it based on frankly, the political dynamics, which I think he was pretty clear about,
yes.
When you have an MTA board that houses real estate developers, you have to sit there and say to yourself, why are they on a transportation board? And what are they, there were subway stops that were shut down for 2-3 years that happened to be in the fastest growing neighborhoods in New York, where of course working people needed to get to their homes. And then they decided, for many reasons, to move out because they couldn't. Who comes in and buys up those properties? Real estate developers. Simultaneously, here's the thing that really just irks me, because you do see a progressive movement that's decidedly not taking some real estate money, right?
Yes.
There's clever ways that they can still take it through other forms. But I understand the building trades wanting to protect their workers. I understand this partnership they're having with developers. But developers right now, the majority of this housing prior to the pandemic was being sold to the same people that we're all criticizing Donald Trump for being in line with. Nobody wants to touch this because it's dangerous. There's empty cash cow buildings throughout the city that are driving up the costs of living in those neighborhoods. People don't live there.
Yes.
They're just bank accounts for oligarchs and who knows what kind of money coming in. And this is a big issue, because especially in Manhattan, I mean, you're like the only person I know that lives in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yes. And I'll give you another example. I mean, even people, and I have a lot of great colleagues from state service. They're not all like the governor. I think most of them are afraid of the governor, but there are a lot of really good public servants. The governor was trying to elevate Jano Lieber to really run, in essence, the MTA. His last full-time job, I believe, was at Silverstein. He's a great guy, but on a personal level, but you have people, and Silverstein Properties is one of the big players right now in pushing forth luxury development at the World Trade Center site. And I'm part of a coalition that is saying, no, we don't need any more luxury development at this time. If anything, we need 100% affordable and deeply affordable, baking into the cake, the bullshit, excuse me, I'm not allowed to say that, mandatory inclusionary housing, which does 25-35% of affordable, which is not affordable, doesn't do anything for anyone. And you continue to elevate people whose only experience or broad experience is how to develop this city for the benefit of luxury, condos and apartments and Hudson Yards. And that's the only model they know. So even if they had the best of intentions, that's what you're going to get. And I think what we see all over this borough and all over this city is people who say, wait a second, you were saying this was going to get me affordable housing, give me the opportunity to stay in my community, and instead I'm being displaced. Or I am, the human nature, the human sensibility of a streetscape that makes this an interesting place to live or a vital place to live is being destroyed by inhumane, massive, I don't want it like Star Trek style development at Hudson Yards, which is so inhospitable. I mean, you look up at it, I live just south of it, and you look up and you're like, where is New York?
Yeah.
What does this have to do with the people of New York?
It looks nothing like New York. New Yorkers don't, it doesn't feel like New York. There's no small businesses.
No.
This also obviously changes even in these like manufactured mini cities that are within Manhattan primarily. And some, I live in Long Island City. It's happening in Brooklyn too, of course. But there are these like new communities that look like you said, they're like Star Trek, they're glass neighborhoods where there's like three businesses in those neighborhoods, but they drive up the cost of living throughout the borough.
Yes.
And small businesses, of course, can't afford to maintain themselves. And obviously, if you do live in public housing in New York, which is still not affordable, you're forced to go to these, larger businesses that are much more expensive. I used to make the joke that like a cup of coffee is $5.50 in New York, not because of $15 minimum wage. It's because the rent is so high.
Yes.
Because everything gets inflated.
True. Well, and by the way, you run into a great point, whether we're talking about Fulton houses or Amsterdam houses, anywhere in Manhattan. And that's really my experience at this point. It's represented everywhere. But, the extremes, I think, are really, especially in Manhattan. What I hear about is they closed my grocery store. Where am I supposed to shop? I can't afford to shop at Whole Foods. So you know what you end up having? You have people shopping at their local deli. And hopefully they take EBT. Hopefully, all of these things add up to make it impossible for most people to live. And I think the most pointed example of this is if you look at Amsterdam houses, which is like on the lower Upper West Side, right behind Lincoln Center, right just south of LaGuardia High School, right amidst to its west, all of the kind of land giveaway development that happened along with, the John Jay College, zoning changes and land, passing over. You basically suffocated a bunch of residents living in NYCHA. There's nowhere for them to shop. There's nowhere for them to go. And you haven't invested in their quality of life in the buildings themselves. I walked in there door knocking and I saw more than one sign next to people's apartments that said, lead contamination, don't breathe here, basically. Like what is someone supposed to do with that? All of this combines. And that's why a progressive movement is so important. And I think it's important to talk about these procedural things like ranked choice voting, like how we make it accessible for people to vote, like how we, how districts get drawn, because that in itself is a huge indicator and determinant of actual progressive opportunity for change. Because I can tell you it's not easy to break through. No matter how many times you do it, we don't give up. And I want to say that message. I'm not anywhere near giving up. I've learned a lot and I have a lot more comrades, I would say, in the fight. But it's not easy and it shouldn't be so hard.
It's an important point you make because, when ranked choice voting came through, and maybe I'm just a jaded former candidate of New York City, as I'm sure you know that feeling, I was suspicious at first because it simultaneously happened with an 8-to-1 matching fund system. And my immediate sense was, oh, great. Every consultant, every political establishment group is going to come in and throw 3 or 4 candidates and make a lot of money off of them with the opportunity of potentially pushing their candidate forward and pushing out any sorts of I knew that while in states like Maine and in Australia, where there are cleaner democratic processes, make it easier for people to rise up that are not part of the establishment. It becomes a tool for backroom deals. True. So, but what you said about like more people turning out is obviously would shift this. If it was not about getting your key contingency or your constituency, to vote, and it was about getting all New York Democrats to vote, and it wasn't such low
Right.
turnout, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Well, and also, let's say if we had same day registration, if we didn't have closed primaries, I mean, that's the kind of things that would really, I think, move the needle too. Nothing is perfect for all time, right? We do have to continuously work on things. But what I will say is, I'm very glad for the public matching system. I think ultimately that and ranked choice voting will be really important changes. But I'll say a few things. I mean, I got in the race 7 or 8 months ago. Everyone else really had been in the race for at least a year. The two men who lead the race, had over $1 million each, $1.5 million, including public matching funds, and they flooded people's mailboxes. I mean, how environmentally sound is it that we're using this paper? And just that. I think that one of the great opportunities of public matching funds is you could start to control, to a certain extent, how much and in what vehicles people's message gets out there, so that actually you could start to see more about different candidates rather than just what ends up, floating up because it has the support of, Ben Kalos kept talking about how he had 100 unions behind him. And that was, a year ago. He didn't, it doesn't look like he's in the running. But if we really want to feed off of this system and make it truly equitable and empower people to vote for candidates that they believe in, then we're going to have to make some restrictions, I think, on numbers of mailers, around how many things go out, both from an environmental standpoint and from how are voters supposed to, I mean, I think you saw any number of those pictures where people had put all over their floor all the mailers they received. I mean, I didn't want those mailers and I'm a candidate. I was annoyed by them and I was in the same process. And I think the only way that we don't oversaturate people and turn them off and kind of recreate and perpetuate the system of, a few well-off, consultants and candidates that the machine supports is by having some controls on the avenues. Even, some time ago, journalists got in, we got in the business of, not the business, but there's an ethics and propriety, question around giving equal airtime to different candidates to a certain extent. And I think, broadly speaking, journalists really try to support that. When are we going to think about, physical mailers and how that impacts the outcome of a race and all of that, particularly when different audiences, particularly by age, particularly by if it's only like pretty regular voters who end up coming out for any number of reasons, we're not getting a good representation of our city. And that should bother everyone. But as we started with, it doesn't bother everyone. The only people that are really bothered by it are those who spend the time either because they're candidates and trying to, change the system, or because you end up being frustrated by a lack of movement on the issues you care about.
It's almost like we need a system like they have in parts of Europe where it's a limited campaign time period. Okay, cool. You get matching funds, but this is your limited period.
And Canada, Canada does something similar too.
Yeah. Got a lot to learn about democracy from other countries.
We do. And that's the point, right?
Democratic.
If I could be hopeful, and I must be hopeful, right? Because I like to challenge the system. I like to challenge the powers that be. And I am eternally optimistic, but we are always going to have a lot to learn. And I think we have a lot to learn at home. So before, every time you see the projections of people like Andrew Cuomo, people like any of our elected leaders looking at some other state, some other place and talking about, accessibility and representation, I think it's casting aspersions because they don't want to focus on what's going on at home. And it should be a sign in your mind and our minds that we've got a real problem. At the end of the day, we got to get rid of these guys, truthfully.
Yeah. All politics is local, right?
Yes.
That's it. Lindsey Boylan, hope you're well. Hope you get a little bit of a break. Hope you get some summer rest.
And
you
I got my dog and
oh my God. This is like
it's my post-campaign dog. It's actually my daughter's dog, but she's at camp, which is why I'm in a car. So
wait, what's his name or her name?
Her name, of course.
Her name.
Truffle, like the chocolate.
Oh my God. Also like the mushroom.
She loves politics.
Oh, she does. Clearly, she's made for TV. Look at her. She's gonna be a pundit. Oh my God. Okay. We'll just freeze on that for a bit.
Yeah.
Post campaign dog, enjoy puppy time, enjoy daughter time at camp, and I hope you get some rest and relaxation.
Thanks for all you do. I'll see you soon.